Let the magic rise.
You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
This is London Calling.
My family and I.
Ooh. Hey, folks. Welcome to Jingly-Jangly. Fake news and imaginary views for the post-truth society. Yes, your antidote to reality with me, Olly Connelly, here in Europe's southern quarter in Spain. Big cheers to Mona and to all the folks here at the Rev. Tonight, or this afternoon, for you stateside lot, World War III. Are we in the foothills of a new global conflict? We've got respected journalist Christopher Kline and talk show host Graeme Sutherland here to chime in. Or, well, I hope we do. Oh, yeah. Actually, that'll be Piers. I think we've got Piers here, too, to tell us what happened, the latest atrocity, the Westminster Bridge. Piers, are you there?
Yeah, I am here. Yeah, hi, how you doing? You all right?
Good on you, man. Yeah, very well. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not so bad. I survived. You know, I wasn't one of the ones that was standing on the bridge, thankfully. But yeah, no, it was horrible, really horrible.
Pretty close to home, man. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I wander over that bridge quite a bit. You know, it is a spot that's covered in tourists most of the time. That's the thing. It's like, so I suppose that I don't know whether this guy was deliberately, you know, obviously wanted to sort of carry out the act near the Houses of Parliament, and whether or not he was aware that, you know, that bridge is primarily covered in tourists of any given day. I don't know. It's pretty horrible, nasty business. Very low tech form of terrorism, mowing people down.
I'm glad to have your take, because obviously you're well known with whoever bothers to listen to this show, and it's your hometown. We've seen this happen all over Europe. We've seen it happen. I mean, it's truth. If you're in the Middle East, then a place like Aleppo is going to be a lot worse. Yeah, but we're seeing this happen increasingly. But now, what is the feeling in London? It has to be said that this was not as terrible as was, for example, the atrocity in Nice. But nonetheless, what is the feeling?
Well, one of sort of stiff upper lip, really, typical kind of British mentality. You know, we're not going to let, you know, some crazed lunatic basically try and ruffle our tail feathers. We're going to just get on with our lives and obviously have a moment's pause in reflection for those that lost their lives and all the rest of it. But no, the general mood in London is one of stoicism and you know, that we're not going to let people like this bring our city to a standstill. You know, it's kind of business as normal. It obviously has frightened people. I mean, I got on the tube this morning, the day after the event, and everybody, there was a sort of subdued mood on the tube this morning. Everybody was, most people bury their heads in their papers or their phones anyway.
Sure.
But there was a sort of atmosphere of slight anxiety on the tube this morning. You know, like, it was almost like anybody.
A slight melancholy, or?
Well, no, it's just like, it was almost like anybody who looked vaguely Arabic or had a beard. Like, you know, they all looked sort of very. As there are quite often on the tube, you know, they looked sort of
today.
Well, they just sort of felt, you know, it was like they were all sort of, you could almost sense they were feeling embarrassed or you know,
it's hard
kind
to
of
say
like
how much of that is our perception as well. It has to be said.
I mean,
also, it has to be said that
Sorry,
I think that of the victims. Whoa, hold on, Chris, just one sec. Of the victims, I think there were 11 different nationalities amongst the victims. So, I mean, I think actually Theresa May said today, if you go for London, you're going for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very multicultural city. It's it's one of the most successful multicultural cities in the world, and that's obviously something we can be proud of as British people. I mean, we are, London is not as ghettoized as somewhere like Paris. I mean, obviously there are neighborhoods where there are sort of predominant, races and cultures, but generally speaking, London functions quite well as a multicultural place, and better than a lot of other places. And obviously there is a sense of unity, and I think people aren't so as judgmental as perhaps they are elsewhere. It's just a very sad thing, that anybody would let a degree of religious zealotry extend to such levels of unbridled hatred. I mean, he was apparently.
Piers, okay. We're going to open up this debate. I want to open this up. Are you around? This is very last minute. I'm really, really grateful to have your take, being a local there on the scene. And as you say, I mean, I know you walk over to that bridge and what have you. Are you around for the next while?
I'm happy to stay with you for the first hour if that's cool. Yeah.
Good on you, man. Good on you. Well, look, we've got Christopher Kline, CNN, Fox, ABC, Bloomberg, international correspondent, war reporter with colours for Latin America, Chechnya, Afghanistan, and Iraq, a human rights activist and a lecturer in journalism, and an old friend of mine, somebody that I was at the Bloom Start with actually all those years back. So Christopher Kline, thanks very much for coming on. And we've also got, and he's based in Lithuania in Eastern Europe. And to contrast that, we've got Graeme Sutherland in Inverness, in Scotland. He's a talk radio host with Truth Count Radio, an arch conspiracy theorist, frankly, and a truth activist and an anti-EU campaigner, and someone to give us a Scottish perspective on Brexit and an idea of the thoughts had in Scotland. And so there we go. My word. Yeah. Hopefully we're going to have quite a balance of views tonight. Chris, are you there?
I am indeed, Olly.
God bless you, mate. God bless you in Lithuania. And Graeme, are you there?
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you very clearly. Chris, your microphone is terrible, mate. You're an international
Let's turn it up now. How does that
correspondent with a bloody awful microphone?
How does that sound now?
Oh dear. And he's a journalism lecturer. I mean, come on.
Is it still crap?
Yeah, it is.
Well, that is unfortunate. Do I sound like Darth Vader when I speak?
Well, you normally actually you don't. No, you sound good. You sound good. This is kind of been yet another reminder. Maybe you can kick us off, Chris. Today, what happened yesterday, but I mean, it wasn't a surprise, and that's actually the saddest thing of all. Here thinking, no surprise.
No, indeed. So let me jump in there. As you know, I have done some consulting on counterterrorism, and when you and I were still together at Bloomberg during my radio days, we were in London still when the IRA routinely used to bomb the city on a regular basis. I even remember the Bishopsgate bomb very clearly, and I also remember when another bomb went off in the West End in a pub I used to frequent, where literally the person that was killed was sitting at the booth that I was sitting at the day before.
Yeah, but hold on, Chris. Yes. I know. However, that was a domestic issue as opposed to an imported problem.
Well, it's interesting. Not long ago, I was visiting with an old friend formerly in the parachute regiment who'd worked with me as my security advisor in Iraq and Afghanistan, who saved my life more than once. So he's like a brother, and we were discussing the state of terrorism then and what things were like in the old Provo days. And there was almost a kind of politesse involved when the IRA used to bomb. They used to phone in warnings and say, we put it in such and such a place. Please evacuate so there aren't any civilian casualties. It was sort of terrorism with white gloves on. Not always, in every instance when we consider the Troubles. But we shouldn't be surprised at all that these terror attacks will continue and indeed escalate, given the status of affairs in the Middle East and the blowback effect at home. And inevitably, as an American, something that I consider is that I'm simply waiting for Trump to jump in and manipulate this fact, especially since one of the fatalities was an unfortunate American in London visiting
That's right.
Vacation to celebrate his wedding anniversary.
Having a dream holiday.
Having a dream holiday that ends in an abrupt, violent death. That's horrific.
Yeah.
But, to get some perspective on this,
not good for tourism either, has to be said.
There is very little that can be done about a lone wolf who has self-radicalized. And let's remember, if we consider the IRA and the Troubles, that the Houses of Parliament themselves were once mortared. Let's not forget the attack in Brighton, where a number of senior members of government were killed in that bombing, and the then Prime Minister Margaret
That's right.
Thatcher,
Dennis was cleaning his teeth at the time, and apparently, it got a bit dusty. It was awful what happened to the ground. It was terrible.
The conclusion is that, like all unconventional warfare, terrorism, in many respects, particularly on that banal sort of ordinary level, is one of the easiest forms of organized violence to perpetrate, and it's one of the most difficult to counter. You can't do anything about the lone wolf. And if I think of the United States and the difference between perception and reality and the hysteria that's being fomented by the current 45th president of the United States, my thoughts wander immediately in linkage to the notion of building a ridiculous wall that will cost $39 billion plus.
Hold on. Whoa. This has got nothing to do with Trump. This could just as easily have happened. Whoa, Chris, hold on. Chris, let me just interject. This could just as easily have happened under Obama.
Now,
yes or no?
That's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that the best security and the best countermeasures, besides education and a level playing field in a society, is intelligence gathering, and above all, human intelligence gathering. And the British security services and the military are not slack about security. That is where the resources...
They knew this guy. They always know them, don't they? They knew this guy, apparently. I mean, they always know these perpetrators. Hold on. Graeme. Whoa, Chris. Graeme, what's your take on this? Bringing in Graeme Sutherland here.
Hello.
Hey, resident Scot. Now, I want to ask you lots about Scotland, Graeme, but I know you've got a lot to say generally, to say the least, like Chris. So this is going to be a lively conversation, and I'm hoping you two are going to spar. And, Piers will probably be British and quite polite, and I don't know what I'll do. But, yes, what is your take on this? I mean, it's just not surprising, is it? But on the other hand, Chris was saying we need maybe more intelligence. I mean, personally, I'm just thinking we need to stop bombing these people out of their homes.
Well, listen, that's exactly the point I was gonna bring up. Every action has got an opposite and equal reaction. We have been using depleted uranium shells in civilian areas in Iraq and Afghanistan, and bombing Syria. We've no right in Syria. We're invaders there. The Syrian government invited the Russians in to to help them, basically. So they're there under invitation. We're there under completely false pretenses. It's been proven time and time again that ISIS are using American equipment, American training, CIA linked, and all this kind of stuff. So we're in there just causing absolute mayhem. And I'm very surprised there's not been more so-called terrorist incidents in London and even Glasgow and Edinburgh and things like that, because we're in there causing mayhem. We are the terrorists.
Yeah.
I'm inclined,
Well,
I'm inclined to agree. I have to say, this relentless bombing in the Middle East that's carried out under spurious circumstances. I mean, we all know that they cooked the evidence to go back into Iraq in 2003. And, there is a strong evidence to suggest that a lot of these outfits like Al-Qaeda and all its offshoots are basically funded and sponsored by, CIA and what have you. And they use them. They call them, they love to label them moderates, but that's just a euphemistic terminology used to sort of to try and minimize the effect it has on the psyche of the public. I mean, it's crazy. We shouldn't be. I mean, whatever you think of, the Syrian president, he is an elected president. The majority of Syrians, and there is a lot of animosity between various factions of Islam in Syria.
He is elected, isn't he? Assad is elected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people think
the
of
way
Assad
that
as being
Putin is
some kind of a
elected,
despot, but actually, whether or not the vote is rigged, Chris, is that vote rigged?
To speak of the Syrian regime and al-Assad as somehow equivalent to any legitimate democratic leader anywhere else in the world is utterly ludicrous. And you are speaking of someone who has killed some 500,000 of his own people since 2011. Let's get
It's
a
very
little
hard for us to know that number, but carry on.
If you're going to make blanket statements about Western intelligence agencies fostering and arming and training some radical Islamist groups, which is true in some instances, but not all of them, you better damn well be specific about who you're speaking about and which specific group. It's not
there
one
have been some CIA whistleblowers, Chris. Chris, there have been some CIA whistleblowers.
You want to talk about Daesh then? You want to talk about Daesh? And I would prefer if you refer to them as Daesh rather than ISIS, because ISIS gives them too much credibility. Daesh is the Arabic acronym that you use, which shows disdain for them because they are not a legitimate state.
What does it mean?
Where does Daesh come from? Daesh comes from the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Iraq. And as Piers mentioned briefly, yes, there is a linkage to the most disastrous decision in Anglo-American power projection in the last century, and having gone to Iraq in 2003 on the basis of false, deliberately exaggerated WMD intelligence, where a lot of people have also forgotten that though they weren't the only partner in bringing that disastrous outcome about, the late Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel, his intelligence service, fearing Saddam Hussein, also spoon-fed Number 10 Downing Street and the White House a great deal of erroneous, clearly manipulated and deliberately exaggerated intelligence, though by no means was it the sole factor, but it played a key role in the Anglo-American decision in the March of Folly in 2003. So let's look at Daesh again. What happens to Daesh? Prior to the Anglo-American invasion and the few other allies from around the world that followed us into that disaster, and don't forget that I was there. I was inside Iraq 1 month before hostilities began, and I would also mention casually that together with the CNN crew at the time, we were under killer capture orders from Muhaqabat, from the Iraqi security services at the time. So we win the conventional war very quickly. We destroy the infrastructure. We then interim American
created a hornet's nest. Created a hornet's nest, Chris.
Yes, it did. Al-Qaeda did not have a presence inside Iraq prior to the invasion, and the only radical Islamist group that existed was where I was.
And this guy yesterday is a direct result of incursions such as Iraq.
You have to deal in facts. You cannot make generalized statements about this. You have to be very specific. And since we're talking about
the fact is, a lot of people have got very wound up, and it's hardly surprising. I mean, look at what we did in Libya, an absolute mess, and then people pouring over from Libya into Europe.
Go back to the thread that Graeme brought out when we're looking at Daesh and the accusation that these are all groups supported by Western intelligence agencies. The only radical Islamist group in Iraq in 2003 was Ansar al-Islam, which was a radicalized Kurdish group, which is strange because most of the Kurds do not ascribe to that militant Wahhabi Salafi vision of Islam. And the 10th Special Forces Group of the United States Army made short work of them together with the Peshmerga. And of course, they were brutally opposed to Saddam Hussein because Saddam Hussein, for all of his monstrous conduct, including killing over 200,000 of his own people, was a secularist. He wasn't an Islamist.
Yeah,
so they were opposed to him. And when we destroy the country, destroy the infrastructure, destroy the military and all the security forces, which we didn't even do as allies in 1945 in Europe at the end of the Second World War. We tried to screen as many former Nazis as we could, but simply to maintain order. There are many photographs that you can see of British Toms and American GIs alongside former German soldiers still in uniform and policemen maintaining order in 1945, 1946. So we destroyed all of the security infrastructure, and we put most of the high command of the then Iraqi armed forces on the street. And how do they reappear? They reappear as Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia. And when, after the surge overseen by General Petraeus, which ironically enough, I mean, it amounted to a Pyrrhic victory, or Pyrrhic victory, depending on your pronunciation, Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia is essentially destroyed, and this reaches an apex when Zarqawi is taken out by U.S. Special Forces in Mosul. But then, a few years later, after the Syrian imbroglio gets underway and al-Assad is slaughtering his own people, this same movement reappears as Daesh. And it's ironic where most of its leadership are still senior officers of the former Iraqi armed forces who were themselves predominantly secularists. They are not necessarily even Islamists themselves, but they understood.
Where do they get their money, Chris? Where do they get their money? Where do they get those orange jumpsuits? Where do they get all the Toyota trucks?
They get a lot of
money.
Where
do they get the weapons?
Well, let me answer you. They get a lot of the money from the illicit sales of control of the few oil-producing areas that exist in Syria.
They needed to be sponsored.
They developed
to get
a lot
started.
of money. They gained.
They were sponsored by somebody.
They gained a lot of money in Iraq from kidnapping and ransom and all sort of basic, generalized crime on a grand scale.
Mate, you can't tell me they went from.
Hang on, I was there, mate. Now you asked about the arms as well.
Yeah.
I was in Mosul. I was the first man into Mosul when the city fell in 2003, together with my crew.
Chris, come on.
I watched a handful of a few hundred American Green Berets trying to secure all the groaning arsenals that a 50,000 strong Iraqi army, Fifth Army that had melted away, had left behind. The Al-Qaeda in Iraq never had to look for any weapons. They were all there groaning from the government arsenals that were left unsecured by Allied forces after the collapse of Iraq.
Can I interject? There's something. What about General Wesley Clark? You know, who made several statements back in the mid 2000s about how there was always a plan on the table to invade and take over sort of 7 countries in the Middle East, and all the ones that we're discussing now were.
There was a name for that plan, wasn't there? I can't remember what it was. Yeah.
Anyway. And you know, I mean, he's been interviewed and has given lectures about this plan that was in place. I mean, strategically, we're talking about very strategic parts of the world where there are resources and they want to run pipelines through them into, you know, Western Europe and all the rest of it. You know, why aren't they taking out, you know, despots in Africa? I mean, if this was a purely moral...
They're not very interested in Sudan, you know, for example, are they?
But if it was a purely moral battle, you know, about, you know, giving people back their freedom, then fair enough, but it's not. You know, if the Americans are policing the world, I mean, ultimately after the Second World War, you know, they were given the remit to set up bases globally as a sort of peacekeeping force. One could argue that has not been necessarily used as it was originally intended. You know, I mean, you know, there have been sort of battles against, you know, communism, battles against all kinds of individuals, I mean, that have led to protracted...
Where the British Empire left off. The end of the Second World War left the British Empire so exhausted, and it was also the death knell of colonialism. The United States simply replaces Great Britain as the dominant global power and takes over a lot of the regions that formerly the British Empire used to control.
I think you're absolutely right, but call me cynical if you will, but do you not think that it has something to do with the inception of the Federal Reserve? And let's clearly spell it out. The Federal Reserve there's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve.
Since 1919, control of the Middle East. Since 1919, strategic control of the Middle East by the West, since the Treaty of Versailles and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, where the French and the British picked over all the bones of the dead Ottoman Empire, has of course rested on securing petroleum. The oil fields of the Middle East is the primary strategic need for controlling the Middle East, as is understood in most of the major Western powers. And very little of that has changed. However, since the introduction and the rise of neoconservative international policy, there was this ludicrous idea that you heard quoted time and again during the previous Bush Jr. administration, that we were going to export American democracy to a culture that was utterly alien to the concept and be greeted somehow as liberators. And let me tell you that there was it was one day only when I was in Iraq where civilians even greeted us, even though we were a news crew rather than soldiers, joyfully as liberators. But that sense of joy that Saddam Hussein, who was a butcher to his own people, rapidly evaporated when the country went to hell on the Americans and the British watch, and it very swiftly turned to anger and very swiftly turned to violence, because there is also something underpinning a lot of that violence and a lot of that resistance, is that whatever ideology they ascribe to, whether they are Sunni, whether they are Shia, it doesn't matter. The people of the Middle East have a very strong identity, have a very strong sense of cultural pride and belonging to the earth that they inhabit and their corner of the earth that they inhabit, and they always look upon any intruder, any trespasser, any foreign invader with a sense of fury, and it happens sooner or later. But then to
that's happening in Europe now as well. I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, I want to throw this open a bit wider, because we're talking a bit too much history. I want to think about where are we going? Where are we going? Graeme, you tell me, because you're over up in Scotland, the far side of Europe from Chris in Lithuania on the eastern side. So you're basically as far over, next stop America sort of thing. I'm down the south.
I don't know if you know, but I run a group, a Facebook group with about 40,000 members called the Real Worldwide Truth Movement. And we have got Syrians and Iraqis in our group. And I regularly talk to these people. Now, a lot of people, I'm talking about locals and military people, British military people, I've spoken to them, and everyone has a different take. They were all there. They were all there in the smoke and everything else, but they've all got a different take on exactly what was going on. So being in the same geographical location as where a war's going on or whatever does not make you privy to any special information other than there's a lot of bombing going on and lots of people getting killed.
Yeah, I mean, this is a contentious. That's a contentious statement. I mean, it's at the end of the day, journalists that are motivated to try and dispel the truth, which I'm sure our venerable colleague in conversation tonight is, will do their damnedest to try and find out the truth, but they can only go with the intel they're given, and that is ultimately the root of where all the questions are, come from. I mean,
I have a question, though, just for both Graeme and Piers. Obviously, you're both concerned and conscientious about it, but do either of you actually have any direct on-the-ground experience of conflict in the Middle East? Have you been to Syria? Have you been to Iraq? And thinking of South Asia, have you been to Afghanistan? And yes, you may be speaking to people that have been there, and you're talking to someone who's been there now, but have you experienced it firsthand? And I just want to go back to, I'm sorry, that it was a comment that sort of got my hackles up when otherwise I was completely in agreement and fully understand what Piers was saying about the attitude in London post the attack at Westminster, that there's this kind of spirit of the Blitz stoicism going on, which is one of the things I most admire about the British people. But you said something that got my hackles up. You said people that looked vaguely Arabic. What the hell is that? Who is vaguely Arabic? I'm half Asian, and I have a face that looks like it belongs anywhere from Southern Europe all the way to the Middle East. And whenever I am home, with the climate of racism that exists at home right now in the United States, even though I literally have an ancestor who was on General Washington's staff in 1776, it depends who's looking at me or what sort of bigot is looking at me, and the perception of race is always very interesting. And I now make jokes that whenever I'm home, though I'm often confused for Mexican American, Latin American, or Native American, I make jokes now that people look at me as if I'm from somewhere stand. What the hell did you mean by saying somebody speaking Arabic? I thought that was sort of accidental.
Yeah, okay, that sounded
racism on your part.
Yeah, no, I'm not a racist at all, and I've never judged.
I remember you. I met you many, many years ago.
Yeah, I've never ever judged. That's it's the kind of leap that people make after a terrorist attack. They we've been bombarded with press sort of indicating that it was a radical Islamic attack. Therefore, everybody getting on the tube in the morning is going to be looking around and looking at people in a different light. They're not in the same frame of mind that they would be in a normal tube journey on a normal any given day where everybody is the same and nobody gives a shit about color or anything like that. But when people's when people are on sort of high alert, if you like, and that changes the entire recipe, which obviously puts everybody's backs up. It has to be said.
It has to be said that we have failed in terms of integration. Integration has not worked as well as we had desired that it would. And I think that's the reason. That's the reason. That's the reason that maybe there is a little bit of, oh God, I don't trust somebody who doesn't look, because there are ghettos in the UK. There are ghettos. If you look at a place like Paris, it's far more stark. Okay, sorry, Chris, go on, bite on that.
The dream of a harmonious multicultural society either side of the Atlantic is still a work in progress. Piers made reference earlier.
It's pathetic. It's pathetic. I mean, it's almost as though they haven't really tried.
No, hang on.
Sorry, go on.
Piers made some positive statements about how effective a multicultural city London is, and I largely agree. But
the UK is not. That's London. But the UK is a failure in that respect.
As a former New Yorker,
well, not totally a failure.
I so miss walking out my door in Brooklyn, where in the span of 5 blocks, I could speak all 4 of the languages that I speak. I could say Salam alaikum to the Yemenis running my corner bodega. I could speak in Spanish to my Puerto Rican friends on the street. I would smile and say bonjour, madame, to the nice Haitian ladies in their Sunday best going off to church, and then go into my favorite Italian deli and order everything in Italian. There's a phrase on American money in Latin that says e pluribus unum, which means out of many one, and it is a reflection of the diversity that we are supposed to embody. And in fact, the borough of Queens and the borough of Brooklyn in New York are the 2 most ethnically diverse places on earth, even more diverse than London and Paris. There are over 600 different ethnicities represented in each one of those boroughs. And you can see with this, what has been labeled the white lash of the Trump election in the United States, I like to say that the side that lost the Civil War in 1865 now holds power in 2017. You can see that, unfortunately, that the notion of that harmonious melting pot is still a work in progress. But it is something to aspire to, because this mixing of cultures, of races, of religions, of peoples, of skin tones, and all sorts of other influences, it's not going away. The notion that you can undo that experiment is ludicrous. And the only response...
Oh, that would be very nasty.
That experiment is a return a resurgence of fascism, both sides of the Atlantic, such as we have not seen since 1945. And then you come to the inexorable conclusion that the only way to correct the problem...
Now, hold on a sec. We haven't got to that extreme of fascism yet. I mean, okay, I know, Chris, you are seriously concerned about the rise of the right. I know. Okay, Graeme, you tell me, where are we going now? I mean, we look at Europe and we do see, I mean, for example, Wilders did pretty damn well in the Netherlands. Very well indeed. Marine Le Pen at the moment is beating Macron in the polls by about 3 or 4 points.
Yes, and Trump got in, that was a big surprise, and Brexit happened, that was a big surprise. There's a people's revolution going on quietly and amongst the masses.
Is it a right-wing revolution, or is it desperation, or what is it?
No, I think it's just a truth movement. I think it's just a truth movement. People want to know the truth. People have woken up to the fact that we've been fed bullshit through the media for generations. Even the older generation, I'm talking now about my father, he's in his late 80s. He said to me, you know, even my friends, and they're all old people, are aware of the fact that we have just been fed propaganda since the Second World War. And he says everybody's really angry about it. We know they're telling us barefaced lies on the media. Now, to go on about race, I'm jumping back a bit here, but you know, you're banging on about race and everything. This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with radical Islam. It's a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual crisis. That's what we're dealing with. It's got nothing to do with race. And Jamaican guys getting, you know, confused for, you know, Iraqis or whatever. It's got nothing to do with skin color or race. It has to do with radical Islam. It's a spiritual issue we're dealing with here.
What you mean ideological?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, Islam is several centuries younger than Christianity, and you look at what the Christians were doing in the name of Christianity 500 or 600 years ago. We were burning people at the stake and
matter of the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, it was appalling what we were doing in the name of Christianity.
That was brought to us by Christian Europe.
You know, I mean, we cannot. What we must understand is that actually the Muslim, I mean, the Moors in Spain, for example. Olly, you live in Valencia. I mean, you know, where El Cid all occurred and all that sort of stuff. I mean,
right.
You know, you've got the Alhambra. I mean, they brought an enormous amount of technological advancement to Spain in the same way that the Romans did throughout the rest of Europe. You know, I mean, like it's, you know, they weren't barbarians. they were actually quite sophisticated people. Sorry?
Piers, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and I want to just interject, and I want you to then resume your thread, if I may. I want to pitch into what you just said, and then pick up your threads. You know, I'm so glad you mentioned Moorish Spain. What is the significance of Moorish Spain in Western civilization? Moorish Spain is literally
and oranges
engine that drives the Renaissance. Despite the fact that after 1492 and the expulsion of the Muslims and Jews from Spain, the Spanish Inquisition kicks in and lasts in the New World until well into the 1700s. It was Arab scholars and North African scholars working alongside Christians and Jews, Muslims, Christians, and Jews together in Moorish Spain that resurrected all of the ancient lost Greek and Roman humanist tradition that takes Europe out of the Dark Ages and becomes literally the foundation for the Renaissance. It is a great irony when people consider this the foolish, idiotic notion of this clash of civilizations that Huntington talked about, when Islam plays a central role in resurrecting Western civilization, and it happens nowhere else than exactly what you were referencing in Moorish Spain. And if there is no Renaissance, then there is no Enlightenment. And if there is no Enlightenment, then there's no Voltaire, there is no Rousseau, there is no Tom Paine, there is no American Revolution, and there is no French Revolution either. These things have to be considered. And when you say that we're discussing too much history, I would say that this is also part of the very problem of this debate on in the larger scheme of things, is not enough of this history is considered. We speak in gross generalities without any historical context. And again, I would also say, to go back, if you want to look at all
fair play,
today,
I consider myself scolded.
Back to 2003, you have to go back to 1919 And before that, you also have to look at how the Ottoman Empire completely mishandled the entire region. Before
Well, okay. There's a bit of history. So now the Ottoman Empire under Erdogan, apparently he wants to come back. And in fact,
can I interject again? Is that okay? Listen. Why has radicalization taken place in modern times? You know, if you look at Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, girls were wearing short skirts. They had their hair down. You know, in the 60s. You know, it was all very liberal. It was a lot more. You know, and then things started to happen. You know, and there was a sea change, and suddenly radicalization started to take place. A different version of very conservative Islam started to take foothold. Why? Because I'd argue that the West had interests in that region, and the only defense that any kind of liberal environment has against their faith and culture is a kind of, you know, uber conservativization.
Afghanistan is the key to that. This is the key to that question. And it was how the Pakistani ISI, the Pakistani Military Intelligence Agency, and the United States short-sightedly worked together to foster the Taliban, where they understood that Islamization of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan was the perfect counterweight to make things impossible for the Soviets. We didn't stop to consider what the blowback from that would be in the decades to come. Do not forget that Osama bin Laden first got his baptism of fire, his training, and gained all of his expertise as a guerrilla and as a future terrorist.
Working with the Mujahideen and being given
in Afghanistan. And there
working with the CIA. Working with the CIA.
Yeah, he was a CIA asset.
Chris, can I ask you? Do you think that?
Berlin Wall.
Do you genuinely think that that bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad in Pakistan? Because I have strong doubts about that. I mean, like the guy was, working in conjunction with the CIA. You know, the CIA were basically giving them Stinger missiles and lots of weaponry in order to fight the Russian helicopter gunships in Afghanistan. You know, he was a liberation fighter in Afghanistan, as you say, a kind of different version of
a radical Islamist. He was a radical.
Yeah, but I struggle with the idea that the whole, whenever Hollywood make films about things, you know, I always begin to doubt the veracity of the story, because I mean, I do think Hollywood is used as a vehicle to steer public opinion, and whether it be 9/11 or anything, you know, it doesn't matter. But they made a film called Zero Dark 30 about taking out bin Laden in Abbottabad in Pakistan, in that compound. You see, I personally think that's spurious.
Well, let me answer you. Look, I can agree that Hollywood is the last place where one should get their foreign policy information.
Yeah, but it's a very, you are clearly a very well-informed and intelligent man. Unfortunately, the majority of people aren't. And they will base their opinions on a Hollywood film.
Let me try and answer. Well, that's most fortunate any more than they should base their opinions on Fox News or reading the Daily Mail. So let me also answer you as best I can, and let me also come back to something that Graeme said not long ago. First of all, let me say that I've never been with U.S. Naval Special Forces or Marine Corps Special Forces. In my time in the field in Iraq and Afghanistan, I spent a great deal of time primarily with U.S. Special Operations troops from the Army, 10th Special Forces Group and 3rd Special Forces Group, as well as some Air Force Special Operations soldiers. And one of the things that I witnessed, because of the trust that I won, though I was never officially embedded, I was a unilateral, free-floating correspondent in northern Iraq, but I was de facto embedded after a while with both the Peshmerga and U.S. Special Forces in northern Iraq, and I won their trust so that I was able to witness the first baptism of fire of the first post-Taliban, fully combat-trained Afghan National Army Brigade in action on the Afghan-Pakistani frontier. I would say this, as far as the taking out of bin Laden, I have you may regard it as naive, but given my experience of special operations troops, I have no reason to believe that that was a hoax in any respect whatsoever. There were that operation, I believe, was a legitimate operation, and it did go down, and it was after the result of painstaking intelligence gathering, and not by remote satellite, but by the most valuable and critical intelligence gathering, human intelligence gathering on the ground. And I don't harbor no conspiratorial thoughts about that whatsoever.
Even though that most of large contingent of SEAL Team 6 ended up dead in a Chinook accident in Afghanistan shortly afterwards, and
that was a different. I know the battle that you referenced.
Can I just interject, guys? Because we're getting Chris, we're way off topic, man. I mean, what I want to know. Hold on. What I want to know is, are we in the early stages of World War III? Are we there? Where are we going now? Graeme? Where do you see that we're going now? If you look at it from the point of view, let's look at it from a regional point of view for a sec. So, for example, from Scotland's point of view, where are we now?
Let me frame that in the context.
We are at the threshold of World War III. There's no question about it. The social engineers have been trying to push for this for years. It's been part of the plan to push for World War III. The fact that there's a huge NATO exercise going on over at the Russian border in Eastern Europe, and we are saying it's to counter Russian aggression. All the stuff they're doing is within their own boundaries. We have installed an extreme far right neo-Nazi group that are running the Ukraine, and the Ukraine is imploding. The CIA were behind all of that. It's complete, absolute nonsense.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
Yeah, please corroborate that.
Because I've got a Ukrainian girlfriend, and she told me the people don't want anything to do with the government. They want nothing to do with them. They want to get back to the way things were when they were on a kind of equal footing. They were trading partners with Russia. Everything was cool. Everything was good. They know that this is not a real government. It's a fake government. It was set up by the CIA, and all the shooting and so on that went on in the Ukraine. There were snipers on rooftops and everything. I don't know if you remember that.
Again, I mean, actually, that's one thing that. Well,
I've been to Ukraine quite recently. I went there last August as an actor, doing an acting job, and I spoke to a lot of people. I was staying in this hotel, and I spoke to the doorman, and I got the general consensus of opinion, about what people think in Ukraine, and a lot of them are very negative towards the Russians. And some of them less so. The Ukraine is a very divided state in terms of the.
There's a big difference between Ukraine and Crimea as well in terms of the mindset.
Well, I mean, Crimea is a very strategic location in the world. It's an extremely important strategic location. I do question the veracity of the election that took place in Crimea. But because I mean there were a huge contingent of Tatars in Crimea that are hugely anti-Russian, and one does question the veracity of the elections there that ultimately led to the reunification of Crimea with Russia. I mean, and I do sort of grasp this idea. I mean, but I do think the West meddle too much in foreign policy. They feel that they have too much They feel that they have to meddle everywhere. I mean, I don't want the Middle East and Ukraine or anywhere to go the wrong way. But at the end of the day, I cannot help but feel this is all to do with banking fraternities and the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and the Americans realizing the opportunity that presented itself during World War II. I'm going to go down the conspiratorial route now and say, I cannot believe that the American government did not have intel suggesting that the Japanese were going to bomb Pearl Harbor. They probably did and took out all the valuable ships, and decided what they could have as a collateral damage, situation. And they allowed, a certain amount of deaths to occur in order to be able to galvanize the American people into pursuing a pro-war stance, which they hadn't been able to do. Nobody in America wanted to get involved in the Second World War, but they needed some sort of atrocity in order to be able to make people feel, oh my God, this is appalling. We've got to do something. And so therefore,
I was reading the report into Operation Northwoods the other day, and I don't know. I hope all of you guys know what Operation Northwoods is, but basically it was a government sponsored initiative into considering by the Defense Department into considering how war could be provoked with Cuba and the kind of tactics that they were looking to employ. So these are they're military government types. The kind of tactics they were looking to employ included, oh, you know what, we'll sink one of our boats in the Guantanamo Bay and pretend it was the Cubans. Or know what we'll do? We'll blow up some Cuban migrants, some refugees in Miami. We'll go to nightclubs where the refugees hang out, and we'll blow them up. And this is all official. This is unclassified. This document. Amazing.
Let Chris respond.
May I rejoin the conversation? There's one thing that I would like to say as well. Is that I'm having trouble with this entire discussion. We are tackling so many different weighty subjects and then flitting from one to another while making sometimes gross generalizations that we are not pursuing deeply enough.
But it all revolves around trust here, doesn't it, Chris? And whose narrative do you believe?
So then I'm going to specifically address some of those issues because, like any good journalist, I'm taking notes as I listen.
Go on. Yep.
First of all, what you mentioned about Cuba, I don't think you have to go that conspiratorial without looking at the events behind the Bay of Pigs themselves, which they speak for themselves.
Yeah, sure.
As far as what Piers was saying about Pearl Harbor in 1941.
But it's not conspiratorial. Well, it is. It was a conspiracy. But yeah, I mean, it's unclassified. Anyway, carry on.
Were on the battleships at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked. And I lost a relative who was commander in the U.S. Navy during the attack on Pearl Harbor. And I'm also a military historian.
Do you believe that there's a possibility that Pearl Harbor was a false flag?
Not a false flag incident by any stretch of the imagination. If you want a real false flag incident that is applicable to that theory, you have to look at Churchill's clear knowledge of the future bombing of Coventry, which he did not disclose with a heavy heart.
Come on, that was not a false flag. That was not a false flag. Coventry was friendly fire.
That had broken the Enigma code.
Exactly.
U.S. naval intelligence broke the Japanese.
How can you be sure that Pearl Harbor was not a false flag any more than Tonkin Bay?
The attack of Pearl Harbor. But Pearl Harbor was in 1941. Let's go back to the present day. There is something that I really look at askance that Graeme said when he spoke, and also want to comment on the Ukraine shortly thereafter, since I am the one that's in the neighborhood under immediate threat. And a lot of the comments that were made about the Ukraine, which I'm in constant touch with every single week, a lot of the members of the Euromaidan movement and a lot of the Ukrainian activists that are confronting the Russians are friends of mine, and they would have apoplectic fits to have heard some of what was just relayed here. But
okay, Chris, we're going to have to.
That was
We're top of the show. We're top of the hour. Top of the hour, Chris. Top of the hour. Top of the hour.
Explanation of the rise of radicalism.
Look, Chris,
That is not the case.
I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you. Give it a couple of minutes. We just got to do the break. You know? I'll tell you what, though. Awesome. Blimey. Piers Garnham, Graeme Sutherland, Chris Kline. Back after the break. Yes. Hello. Oh, yes. We're back indeed. Hello. Yes. Jingly-Jangly. You're listening to Revolution Radio. Olly Connelly here. And yeah, if you like what we do, then by the way, do us a favor. Pop over to the website and donate some dosh. That would be useful because we have to run these servers and all that stuff and etc. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's great. So we've got Graeme Sutherland from Scotland, Chris Kline in Lithuania, and Piers Garnham in London, and we're discussing World War III, and we have a divergence of opinion here. And Chris, I want to pull you back because you were getting a bit hot under the collar there, and you may have had a point.
No problem. No problem. So let me handle three things. Let me first respond to Graeme saying that since 1945. The media has been feeding the public BS. As a journalist, though there is a tremendous crisis in journalism today, there is no doubt, I take tremendous offense to that. And I just quickly made some mental notes. The coverage of the Vietnam War, the coverage of the Bosnian War, the coverage of Watergate, the coverage of all the failed revolutions and dirty wars in Latin America, and in particular in Central America, the coverage of the fall of apartheid, the coverage of the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, as well as the coverage of the war in Afghanistan under the Soviets, as well as the first evolution of modern terrorism in the second half of the 20th century. Let's not forget that terrorism is something very ancient as well as the coverage of the famine in Somalia in the early 90s that led directly to UN intervention, are all prime examples of superb journalism that does not at all fit the definition of that easy swipe at all journalism since 1945. These were great moments in journalism.
Yeah, no, sure.
But
hey, come on.
Actually had an impact in changing reality.
Yeah, I'm not buying it.
Those are not just minor exceptions. These are significant, massive exceptions. Just consider.
Yes, they are.
Consider the Vietnam War and Watergate in of themselves and the consequences that they had. Now.
Okay, Graeme.
So next, bouncing back to Islam. Graeme, who I don't think has a deep understanding of Islam, and I don't get the impression that he's ever set foot in an Islam.
You've got to let Graeme defend himself, Chris. I'm just saying. Hold on. Let's take these points one at a time. Let's take these points one at a time. Whoa. You've got to let Graeme defend himself as well, Chris.
No, but he hasn't. But I haven't made the point that he's going to have to defend himself with.
Well, because you've just charged him that he basically said the media had been lying since 1945, and you cited various examples.
He said it.
You
cited
various examples to the contrary.
Islam that was totally incongruous.
Graeme, defend yourself.
Okay, well, all the mainstream news outlets are run by secret societies. We know this for a fact. And they have an agenda, and they've got an agenda, and their agenda is basically to mislead us, is to tell us lies. That's what they're all about. I'm not talking about random journalists here and there. I'm talking about the ethos, the whole ethos behind mainstream news.
Chris, let him talk.
Continually fed bullshit. We're continually fed an agenda that we need to do this and we need to do that because we've went in and created mayhem, and we've created all the problems, and then suddenly we have got to go in and be the solution, and we've got to, blow all these people up when it was us that went in and caused all the trouble in the first place. Now, I'm not.
Well, okay,
I mean, Watergate's irrelevant.
Secret societies running all the media. That is a bit of a charge. Then again, having said that, what was his name? Died this week. Rothschild, Rockefeller. Yeah, there you are. He was involved in setting up secret societies, like Bloomberg. Not a secret society as such, but a very secretive society. And actually, what's the difference? Council on Foreign Relations, didn't he set that up as well? So these sort of things that influence and, in fact, set foreign policy and international policy. Chris, I mean, Graham's got a point about these sort of societies that are telling us how to think, what to eat, etc.
Absolutely.
The duty to inform the public with accurate information and to serve as a check and balance to the abuse of power has always been a central mission of genuine journalism. And that is just way...
Yeah, but how much genuine journalism is there now?
I mean, let me say,
really?
I won't mention who they are, but let me say that I personally know the heads of 3 American networks. I personally know the publisher of one of the major American newspapers, and last I checked, they didn't belong to some sort of secret Freemasons order, as neither did Woodward and Bernstein at the Washington Post when they were correctly holding Richard Nixon to account.
Yeah, but come on. I mean, hold on. Whoa.
The Washington Post is a CIA newspaper. That's known all around the world.
Keep throwing about the 3 letters in Langley, like constantly without any substantiation. It's not that there aren't real conspiracies out there. It's not that the CIA doesn't have a very checkered past. But if you're going to make those statements and accusations, you have to corroborate them.
I'll tell you one. I'll give you one. I'll give you one for the CIA.
See, we had me in a bar.
We had Susan Lindauer on here. She was a CIA asset, and she was telling us how she told what's his name, Wolfowitz, she basically told the Bush administration and her department about that there were the Al Qaeda were planning attacks on
Condoleezza Rice,
and they were ignored. The warnings were ignored, and so Susan Lindauer, who was she was in charge of the dialogue between the U.S. and Iraq in the run up to the Iraq War, and she said the 9/11 was used as a pretense to go to a war, justification to go to war with Iraq.
Of course it was, and it was a profound intelligence failure when there were many warning signs of a massive.
So you don't think that was a false flag, Chris?
Prior to 9/11, that was a systemic failure of the federal government at multiple levels.
Chris, 9/11 was a false flag. It has to be. If you look at the intel, it was a false flag. You look at they've released the footage of whatever it was that hit the Pentagon quite recently, and you can freely watch. You can watch that footage now, and it is not a passage.
Not false flag attack. But if you want to get into material that is problematic, since also earlier Graeme made these sweeping generalizations how the majority of the radical Islamist groups in the Middle East are somehow the brain children of Langley. Let me say, if we go back at Daesh, because we were talking about the evolution of Daesh from Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia and its leadership coming from the former ranks of the Saddam Hussein era military, which also jibes with another blanket statement that Graeme made. Who is supporting and who is the primary source of support until now for Daesh in literal terms? That
Saudi Arabia?
That many serving
Kuwait? No, sorry, Qatar?
Well, one of them you already said. Well done, Pierce. Saudi Arabia. Gulf states, the Gulf Cooperation Council states are, and until very recently, Erdogan himself.
All right, Chris, listen, Chris. Why is
selling them, buying and selling their oil, which is a primary source of income for them? They also deal very heavily in narcotics.
Chris, look, the official 9/11 report had 28 pages of redacted information that everybody was lobbying to get released, and finally got released. And then it said that the Saudi Arabian government sponsored the guys that ultimately were trained to fly those jets into the Twin Towers. Now you've got huge amount of people,
and there's a lawsuit today,
who had lawsuits being launched now by families, members of people that died in 9/11, suing the Saudi government. Personally, I think this is spurious because
maybe they should sue NORAD.
But I mean, Trump invoked his travel ban. He invoked his travel ban, and it hasn't included Saudi Arabia.
Don't mix too much in there. Now let me get in there, because one of the things where I can agree, there is a great deal of functional, institutionalized hypocrisy, not just with the United States, but with the whole of the West in dealing with the Wahhabi oil states.
That's right.
We have made
Saudi Arabia.
We have made an unholy deal with the devil, not just Saudi Arabia, but also
Clinton was on the payroll, according to Podesta's emails.
Let me finish now. Who are the majority of the source of support for most of the radical Islamist groups in the world, including among them the Taliban. And it's Saudi Arabia that predominantly finances all of the madrasas in Pakistan that produce a lot of baby future embryonic Taliban members.
That's happening in the UK now.
Taliban
our collusion with the Saudis and the Gulf states is absolutely self-defeating in the context of trying to tackle Salafi-inspired terrorism, because they're the primary sponsors of it. And that sense, it is utterly ridiculous. And it makes me think of what Lenin once said, which we modified. Lenin once said that the West will sell us the rope to hang them with. And the Salafi petro-dictatorships are doing exactly the same thing to the Western world. And let's not forget that one of the first things that George Bush Jr. did following the 9/11 attacks was to ensure that all of bin Laden's extended family, lest there be reprisals,
be
flown out.
Country. But having said that, I will not be party to any conspiratorial theory about 9/11, not least when my family knew 6 of the victims that died in that attack.
Can I just add a caveat? Bin Laden's sister flew into the UK not that long ago, and she'd done that journey many times on a private jet, and apparently she had intel for the Chilcot report, which was all about the investigation into the evidence surrounding testimony. And her plane suddenly crashes and she dies and everybody else on board dies. Do you not think coincidences like this resonate in some way, or are they just, as you think, coincidences? Because I don't think they are.
There was no coincidence that Noran was stood down for about 5 hours during the attacks. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating that. 2 or 3 hours. That's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
Chris, I do...
Hold on, Graeme, what do you reckon?
Since you posed the question.
About 9/11.
Oh, I don't know. Where do you start? I mean, it's typical that we get onto 9/11, though. It was the day that changed our lives. And I suppose it's apt that we talk a bit about 9/11 tonight, because hopefully, at some stage tonight, we're going to get to where are we going? Because that's really what I want to. That's what I want to find out from you guys.
I don't think World War III is going to happen at all.
With 9/11, I haven't met anyone in my day-to-day life or online that believes the official story. No one believes the official story.
Chris, do you believe the official story?
I mean, Chris, they found Muhammad al... They found his passport in the rubble. I mean, how daft is that?
Yeah,
they
but
didn't find the engine.
The black boxes.
This is not, look, if we're going to discuss along those lines, this aspect of the conversation, I can't participate in it because it goes against my every grain of training as a journalist. Yes, there are some rather startling coincidences.
No,
yes,
hold on. No, Chris. But let me just say to you, we have as journalists are questions, and you must have questions about 9/11, surely.
Well, I'm trying to answer you. I'm trying to answer you as best I can.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that the majority. I mean, it's an empirical fact that the majority of the attackers were Saudis. Now, you can put forth the supposition that somehow, the still unproven supposition, that, and this is where the burden of proof is always critical, and this is what separates real news from fake news. It has to be corroborated by multiple sources, and that theory has not been corroborated. Can you have a healthy suspicion?
What theory?
Can you have a healthy suspicion that there was some kind of
what theory
by Riyadh in the attack? Yes, perhaps you can have that suspicion, but you cannot put forth that assertion unless you can guarantee it with concrete empirical evidence that can be fully corroborated.
Hold on, we were given no evidence of the official story. No, Chris. Well, you could say exactly the same thing about the official story that does not stand on its own logic. There's no logic to the official theory.
That's nonsense.
If you're going to question it and challenge it. The only
difference is that it's been verified by the establishment.
Just watch the footage of whatever it was that hit the Pentagon. It's not a passenger jet. It's not a passenger jet. It's a cruise missile. It's a cruise missile.
Concept offensive. I can't even touch it. And I am no fan of Riyadh and of the Wahhabi royals.
No, God, no. Who is? But literally, listen. The Twin Towers were ancient buildings. They were riddled with asbestos. There was hardly anybody renting the office space.
Larry Shaw was doing a double liability.
They knew that literally there was hardly any of the office space being rented in the Twin Towers. There were white elephants in the middle of New York. They knew that they could take them down, demolish them.
Forensics experts, bring to me 100 structural engineers.
What about Building 7? Building 7 wasn't even hit by a bloody missile.
I know, it just collapsed.
It was hit by a steel beam.
In its own footprint.
It was hit by a steel beam that for some reason went sideways instead of down.
And they blamed it on an office fire, and then the whole building collapses, which has been proven.
Man, it's ludicrous.
I think there were 3 office fires, and somebody dropped a cigarette.
It's not, dude. You are. What I find so fascinating about you, Chris, is that you're clearly a really intelligent man, but you're kind of like,
okay,
you're being swept up in the story that you believe intrinsically that your government is not evil.
What I believe about 9/11, and I'm a great critic of my own government, but I'm a journalist. I'm an investigative journalist.
Yeah, but Chris, why would you believe the official narrative as opposed to any other narrative?
And
the narrative stinks. I mean, if you investigate
it's just a joke. Let's face it.
As a fact, you cannot do that. That is not how journalism works.
Doesn't matter how journalism works. We've got common sense, and we can see that it's riddled with lies.
Fair enough. But don't
ethics of journalism doesn't even come into this. What we can see is a whole network of lies. We're fed a
I revert back to what I was saying about General Wesley Clark earlier on about the planned 7 countries to be invaded. You know, there is a modus operandi in place. This has to be clear. You know, that atrocities occur. You know, collateral damage is an accepted part of the recipe. You know, they wanted those buildings demolished. They were full of asbestos. They needed multiple millions of pounds spending on them, or dollars spending on them, in order to be able to retrofit those buildings to make them.
But we can't be
bring
sure.
Them up to modern standards.
We can't be sure.
Larry Silverstein took out an insurance policy.
He did very well. He got double dibs on the insurance as well. You know, again, we can't be sure. But my point is that we can't be sure of the official narrative either. Chris,
I don't think we can. The official narrative.
The official narrative didn't.
I read
the official 9/11 Commission report because I did some a bit of work on that as well, and I didn't. There was not a single reference to Building 7. I mean, Chris, it's a joke. They wouldn't take Bush and
9/11
Cheney's
is- 9/11 is a
testimony.
joke, and
Oh, anyway.
theories about
Hold on.
9/11, I will dismiss until I am presented with a smoking gun. You can have your suspicions.
Okay,
You can have
I'll give you the
doubt.
smoking gun.
You can
I'll
have
give you the
healthy
smoking gun right
skepticism.
now.
This
NORAD
is
was
where
stood down
you're
for
in
about
danger
4
zone.
hours
You're in
whilst there were
danger
planes
zone.
being rammed
You
into
are
big buildings
in
in the
a
US.
danger zone
That's a
where
smoking gun.
supposition and
Building 7's a
hypothesis
smoking gun.
become credible as fact and objective journalism, which it is not. This is purely opinion.
No.
We can all have our doubts.
We are in the post-truth society. There is no journalism. There is no truth. There is only spin and a running order.
That
And the
is-
running order
that
is a lot of
sorry,
nonsense, it
I
seems
think
to me.
that
at the
is
moment.
the-
Because
with
you
all
know,
due respect, say that
most
there is
people
no
know more
truth.
about
There's a giant
Justin
puff of
Bieber than they do
horse
about 9/11.
Yeah.
There is no objective truth left, Ollie. Really? How is that? Clarify that statement.
Okay, I will.
How is
I will.
there no
The
empirical
mainstream media, it seems to me, in my humble opinion, yeah, and I want to get you guys your opinions here, but I'll throw one in. It seems to me the mainstream media is just a press release service for the establishment, for
Of course it is.
and
Of
that's
course
it.
it is.
It is fake news.
I mean, the
Sorry,
BBC in the UK is being, potentially threatened with legal action because it's so biased towards a certain agenda. And
That's right. 70 MPs, Tory MPs, stood up and said,
the
"Look, you know what? Can you stop?"
and the
is
BBC is supposed to be public service
established.
impartial, and it's not. It's rampantly pro Europe. Pro. Anti-Brexit. I mean, I don't believe Brexit has anything to do with racism, because it really. I voted to leave, and I didn't vote to leave because I don't like multiculturalism. That's not true at all. I voted to leave because I voted against financial corruption. I see the corporations having far too much dominance, taking over, consolidating everything. And basically pumping whatever they're selling into everybody's lives. That I personally think is really invasive and negative.
Absolutely.
And
Self-perpetuating.
it's not about black faces. Nobody cares what color anybody is. I don't. I really couldn't give a shit. I judge every book by its cover. There are arseholes in any walk of life. Any walk of life. It doesn't matter whether you're white, black, yellow, whatever. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's about who you are as a person, what you've learned in life, and how you purvey the things at large. It's not about racism. It's about financial corruption. I mean, the EU is a club.
Yeah.
It's a corporate bloody club
It's a disaster, man.
of
It's a
conglomerate
disaster.
corporate entities that basically pat
Vladimir
each other on the
Putin
back
is
and do
very
business with
happy
each
to
other.
hear this.
I mean, it's wrong. We can't allow the corporates to take over. If they do, it's not going to benefit us. I mean, one of the reasons Ukraine is in the situation it is because Poroshenko is a US puppet, and Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and Monsanto.
First thing they did was give Joe
GMO
Biden's
crops.
son the energy rights. So I recall.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
fracking. But anyway,
Monsanto are trying to
Chevron.
grow all their GMO in Ukraine right now. The Americans are all over Ukraine because of its geopolitical position. It's right on the Russian border. It's an enormous country with incredible natural agricultural resources. They want to pump their Monsanto GMO in Ukraine. They have huge. They have
Monsanto
huge
love juice.
eco-financial, interests in that country. Plus, Poroshenko is the perfect opportunity to prod Russia. I'm not saying the Russians are devoid of guilt, because they're not.
You're giving me an ulcer.
Go on, Chris. Come on, Chris. We've given Chris a bit of a hard time. I have to say.
Ukrainian friends were participating in
Not very balanced.
What you said about the European Union, the Vladimir Putin is delighted to hear you say it. because unraveling the European Union and unraveling NATO is how Putin collapses the West. And he is doing that in his brazen support of every far-right group in Europe you could care to name. And he is doing it through his...
Okay, now you need to corroborate that. Now, that's like...
And PSYOPs operations in all of Europe. And
can you corroborate that? Can you corroborate that? Chris, can you corroborate? You said that he is funding, a la Soros, he is funding all the far-right groups.
Marine Le Pen, and it is a documented fact, has received 150 million euros in funding from Russia. The Russians are funding the primary far-right group in Italy as well. They are strongly behind Geert Wilders and are deeply disappointed that he lost the election in the Netherlands. Now, about the Ukraine, why? And since I'm the one in Eastern Europe, and since out of all the four of us, I'm the only one that has seen the Russian army at its genocidal worst in the Caucasus when I went to my first war in 2000. The Russians have always seen Central Europe, the rest of Eastern Europe, the borders of Central Asia and the Ukraine itself as their natural defensive line and part of Greater Russia. That has been true in post-Soviet Russia, as it's clearly the case. It is true during Soviet Russia, and it was true during Tsarist Russia. They have always looked upon the encroachment of NATO into the East and all of the former Warsaw Pact countries joining the Atlantic Alliance as a direct threat to them. And so when the Ukraine was making noises about both joining the European Union and NATO, Putin decided that was enough because this is his backyard, his front yard rather, and he decided to intervene, and he had a lot of support from the minority Russian ethnic population in the Ukraine. Now, you've also made a lot of blanket statements about the Ukraine. It is true that a lot of Ukrainians, while they vehemently oppose Russian aggression, are absolutely tired of the Soviet hangover and all of the corruption that they still endure at the hands of their own government. But that doesn't mean that they are ready to welcome the Russians back and become annexed and become another province of Moscow. And they are adamantly patriotic. And the far-right nationalists...
The Crimeans seem very keen to be Russian, though.
The far-right element among those Ukrainian nationalists is only a minority element, and this is exaggerated by Russian propaganda as well. And now, here...
They see themselves as very different from Ukraine, and also the Eastern Ukrainians do.
There's something that none of you have acknowledged and none of you have said. This is currently the greatest confrontation between the West and Moscow by other means since 1945. And to pretend otherwise is to be blind to one of the pressing crises of our time.
What do you mean? You mean in terms of a long-term, kind of a contretemps? Because obviously...
The Russians lost more during the Second World War than any other nation on earth, and they were our allies in the battle against Nazi Germany.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm glad you pointed that out, Piers, because here's the irony. Right. During the Second World War, what are the three powers that defeat Nazism, Italian fascism, and Japanese ultranationalism and militarism and imperialism? The United States, the then British Empire, and the then Soviet Union. Now, fast forward to 2017. In 2017, the United States is very close to being a neo-fascist country, sadly, under the current leadership. And Britain has decided to get in bed with, as its most loyal ally, May has decided to get in bed with Trump because there are no other alternatives as well post-Brexit. And ironically enough, the country that suffered the most and lost the most, the now current Russia, had 29 million killed of the 60 million killed in the Second World War, for its own strategic purposes to unravel NATO and the European Union, is the primary...
Look, the EU has got nothing to do with NATO. Chris, whoa, I'm sorry, you cannot have the EU and NATO in the same sentence, because NATO actually is worth spit, and the EU is just a plutocratic boys.
Oh, really? NATO is worth spit. You don't live where I live. I live a couple of hours away from tens of thousands of combat-ready Russian troops. And
No.
Are you in Riga, Chris?
You're misunderstanding. You're misunderstanding my nuance. NATO
Where is Chris?
worth something. It's worth something. The EU
Chris, where are
is
you?
a plutocratic club.
In Kronus.
It's in Lithuania.
NATO are dangerous and responsible for all the tension in Eastern Europe. NATO are the problem, not the solution.
Oh,
NATO
good
or the
Lord.
UN?
NATO are the
I
problem.
do think that this
It's
has
an
got to
outdated-
do. I mean, we talk about history and we talk about, dissolving it back to the roots of the situation.
That's a lie.
I
That is
do
a lie.
think
Why-
that.
We
Why
can't
is
dissolve
it
anything
okay?
back now.
NATO are a
Russia-
Cold War relic, a bunch
Right,
of
well,
greedy old men.
what about Eisenhower saying, "Beware the rise of the military-industrial complex"? I mean, that's what he said when he left office. What did he know about the American industrial complex that we don't know to this day? I mean, he was clearly trying to warn
He knew what we see on the news every night, which is, under Obama, not a single day of peace, and probably the same deal with Trump. No peace with these people. And 7 wars under Obama. He won a peace prize. Talk about taking the peace. I mean, what a joke. Absolute joke. And we're supposed to, this is supposed to be okay, is it? It's supposed to be all right.
Ollie and I had Laura Eisenhower on the show, who's the granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower, and she is radically, conspiratorial.
Nice girl, lovely girl,
nice girl, but she has some very, very way out there opinions on the way the world is put together, and maybe we can tangentially go down.
I think everybody does.
I mean, at the end of the day. I mean, she genuinely believes that her grandfather met with, people from not this planet, and that there is a sort of neo-Nazi kind of American collaboration.
Extraterrestrials. This is going in a good direction. I want Graeme to explain and substantiate further why NATO is the problem and Russia isn't the problem, when NATO is the only safety net holding the line, preventing a Russian onslaught, not only in Eastern and Central Europe, but Northern Europe and Western Europe. Explain yourself, and explain yourself in sound strategic terms why it is merely a Cold War relic that should be done away with, and what's going to replace it for collective European security. A unified European army? It is still in the planning stages. Even the French-German unified corps that Mitterrand so desperately wanted to create is a shell of an organization. And the most
it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense.
A very small mission.
Okay.
All you're doing is repeating main. Listen, it's all nonsense, and all you're doing there is repeating mainstream media cliches. Russia were ready to fully embrace the West, and for the first time in history, we had a chance to have a completely relaxed and peaceful Europe. But I'm talking about America. We broke our own treaties and went ahead and installed missile systems, very provocatively. Missile systems there. That was the first act of treason, really, because we broke our own treaties. So obviously, Russia are going to counter that. Of course they are. And then we put in, 50,000 troops or whatever doing exercises on the border. We are provoking them.
Yeah,
they've done absolutely nothing. We are the problem.
I have to say, I do not understand why we just can't get on with Russia. I mean, Putin. You covered Chechnya, Chris, and I thought that Chechnya was a bastard war. It was a horrid war, and Putin to me looked like a really nasty person for that. However, I saw exactly the same in Libya and what happened there. Not in different thing. The Americans had no claim over Libya at all. Putin had some over Chechnya, one could argue. But
stay on
yeah,
point, because
I mean,
a significant point was made. Look, the three
Putin.
we're all
Putin.
speaking
No.
to each other.
Hold on. Whoa. Because I want to
We're
move
all
this on.
speaking
I
to
want to
each other
move.
from Europe.
No, Chris, please.
We're all
I want to
speaking to each
move.
other.
I want to move this on so that we're moving somewhere towards this theme, which is like, are we in the foothills of World War III? And that is very much about. I mean, should we not have more respect for the leader of Russia?
Yeah, of course. We need to wind our necks in and stop this doublespeak and stop calling the Russians the aggressors when all they're doing is protecting their own borders. We're on their doorstep, pissing all over it. It's ridiculous to say that they're the aggressors.
Good Lord, where have you been?
Chris, listen. What about all the paedophilia that's been going on? What about?
No, hang on.
No.
You're gonna to make a
oh dear, let's just bring the Pope into it. Come on, let's get the truck. Oh yeah,
it's true. I mean,
versus the Pope.
Look, Chris, we've got a prime minister in this country from the 70s. You know, Ted Heath, who a chief of police said 120% he was a blackmail paedophile, you know, I mean, who brought us into the European Economic Community, you know, which was the first stages of the EU. You know, I mean, you know, this guy was a rampant pederast, you know, I mean, and now you've got Pizzagate, which I think has legs. You know, no, it's true. I mean,
he was also a necrophiliac as well.
You've got Jeffrey Epstein and all his connections and his private island, and Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, and to name just two, going to their. You know, you do not think that this has influence over the geopolitical arena? You know, of course it does.
Olly.
Yeah. Sorry.
Olly,
yes.
Step in. I want to make this suggestion since you're master of ceremonies here. We are all speaking from European cities.
Yes.
And we're bouncing all over the place.
This was supposed to be about Europe tonight, but it kind of got misconstrued. But anyway,
and we've made a lot of dramatic statements about a lot of issues. But now let's focus on what I consider to be the central issue when all of us
opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely
all the fault of Christopher Kline. Sue him. Carry on, Chris. Sorry, go on.
Well, so let's talk about Europe. And where Graeme makes the accusation that I'm parroting some sort of establishment line. I would say to him that what emerges from his mouth sounds like he's an apologist for both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and the European far right. Yeah, let's be kinder and gentler to poor Vladimir Putin, who is one of the worst human rights violators on the planet.
Come on. I mean, hold on a sec. I mean, my prime minister sells arms to the Saudis. I mean, what's the difference?
Let me finish, if you would. Now, let me finish. He made all those statements, so now let me respond properly. This is Vladimir Putin, who is the primary arms supplier to al-Bashir, who is the primary arms supplier to the one sitting president in the world who is facing indictments by the ICC for war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity, the leader of the Sudanese regime. This is a man who, in the post-Soviet era, has exercised the most brutal draconian rule over his own people, where his country is not a democracy, it is a de facto dictatorship with the cosmetic trappings of democracy, though there's a lot of that going around. And he routinely eliminates political rivals. He routinely eliminates journalists.
Yeah.
He's got the blood.
There's all sorts of smoke going on. I agree with that.
He's got an unacknowledged genocide on his hands in the Caucasus. And now, if you want to talk about conspiracy,
he doesn't really believe in fixed term limits either, does he?
The FSB agents that were directly involved in the plot, the conspiracy with Donald Trump, have all mysteriously.
Oh, come on. That's all. Oh, come on.
Look, I mean, look, you've only got to look at the general situation. Why aren't they taking out Mugabe in Zimbabwe? You know, I mean, he's a despot. There was loads of despots in Africa. Well, you know, I mean, if it was about moral issues, it would be about removing
about strategic issues, not only
It is
moral.
it's about strategic
That's
issues. Yeah,
realistic.
it is.
Are we going into World War III?
No, that's the question.
Yeah.
Mugabe poses only a threat to the people, the long-suffering people of Zimbabwe. Vladimir Putin is a threat to the Syrian people, is a threat to all of Europe, is a threat to Western security, and is the primary benefactor of the genocidal Sudanese regime. And he is seriously also being courted now by Erdogan as Erdogan continues to go off the rails and keeps revealing his own extremist leanings.
He's nonsense. Nonsense.
Vladimir Putin with kid gloves is utterly naive. And it is not, if you want to look into her ledgers, it is not a fabrication. It is not hypothesis. It is not supposition that Marine Le Pen has received 150 million euros in funding from the Kremlin and is seeking more. And by the way, what was my first ever televised interview, which I did in French, with Jean-Marie Le Pen, her father. So I'm rather familiar with the phenomenon of modern-day fascism in Europe, not to say that I also grew up, spent the first early part of my youth living under Franco in Spain. I'm all too familiar with the face of modern fascism. And you have to consider that Vladimir Putin is a fascist of another sort, nothing less. And beyond that,
she's come on. Okay, now we're getting closer to what this theme is about tonight. Graham, carry on. Graham, counter that, Graeme Sutherland, please.
Well, it's just I can't believe how many cliches this guy reels out, and tries to say he's informed. It's absolute nonsense. The Russians. I've lived in Russia. I know all about Russia. I speak Russian. I've lived there. I've lived in Moscow. I lived in St. Petersburg. I know the Russians. They are gentle people. They're kind. They are not aggressive, but you don't mess with them. And that's what we are doing. We are messing with them. If we just leave them alone, they'll be fine. They'll be excellent trading partners. They'll be fair. They'll play by the book. They're cool. But we are poking the big bear with a stick. That's what we are doing. NATO are a nightmare. We are going to cause World War III. It's got nothing to do with the Russians. They just want to get on their feet after the Soviet era. They want to get back up on their feet, and they want to just trade and sell their gas and sell their oil and just get back on the world stage. They have got no ambitions about coming across Europe and everything. It's utter nonsense. It's hyperbole. You're just coming out with hyperbole. It's utter nonsense. I can't believe that anyone could come out with so many media cliches. It's nonsense, man.
What experience of war do you have, Graham? What battlefield?
Well, that was explicit.
Do you have any war experience? Have you seen the Russian army at its worst in action? Have you?
I have to see. I've watched the news, and it does kind of look to me as though we're pulling the tail of the bear. I mean, it did look to me as though that's what Ukraine was. I mean, who hired the snipers in Kiev?
They were CIA snipers.
Curious.
His quota, his source
CIA.
of Ukraine.
But I revert back to Wesley Clark. We wanted to invade 7 countries. Does that not reek of some sort of modus operandi? You know, it's like, you know, look, Israel has a massive lobby in the Senate and Congress. You know, I mean, the majority of the Senate and Congress are dual nationals. You know, Israel is slap in the middle of this thing, you know, surrounded by countries that despise Israel. You know, the Palestinians despise Israel. I mean, the Israelis, under Netanyahu are systematically, basically, reducing the size of Palestine daily, building settlements on their land. They basically want to destroy Palestine, so it no longer exists. And they have an amazing lobby in the American government. And they are heavily funded by the American military. And if I was Israel, I'd want to be safe as well. Surrounded by my enemies. But Israel was a state created by the West, as was Iraq, as was Kurdistan. I mean, basically, the West has carved up the Middle East and described the borders, and then expected everybody to make good. We are solely responsible for the mess that the Middle East is.
Can we go back to Europe, please? and Graeme's assertions that the Russians are all cuddly-feely, adoring people. Vladimir is a good, misunderstood guy. There is no Russian aggression, and NATO is a relic of the Cold War and is provoking a potential Third World War. As if Russians didn't march into the Crimea and annex it. Sorry, who is the aggressor?
Listen, Russia have had the Crimea for about 1,000 years. What are you talking about? And most of the Ukraine, listen, most of the Ukraine was gifted. Most of the land, 75% of the land of the Ukraine was gifted to the Ukrainian people by the Russians.
It was sovereign Ukrainian territory in the current state when it was invaded. And if it was such a small affair, why didn't the Ukrainians just willingly hand it over gift wrapped with cookies and candy? Why was it instead a highly complex Russian military operation to seize it?
No, well, it wasn't. I had a vote. I had a vote. The Crimean people got to vote, and they voted to go with Russia.
Okay, look. Okay, all right. Whoa. Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Time out, darling. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left. We've got 10 minutes left, and I want to know, what do we do? What do we need to do? Where are we?
Do you think Third World War is going to happen? I personally don't think it's going to happen. I don't believe that Third World War is going to happen. I actually think there are going to be some great exposés about the corruption within the Democratic Party, the Clinton Foundation. I think that's all going to get exposed. I mean, Comey's clearly on the payroll of the Clintons. He was being pushed and pulled prior to the election. He didn't actually reveal anything, but that now it's been proven that basically he's lied, to congressional hearings, Comey
isn't going to set up World War III.
It's
the Russians and America, or America and China.
I think we're going to have a moment of truth. I think we're going to have expose. You've got WikiLeaks.
We all have that.
You do Julian Assange, who is. I think Ed Snowden got the mother load out of the NSA, and
you look at all the potentials for World War III. There is blue touch papers all over the world. If it doesn't happen between Israel and Iran, it'll happen with North Korea and South Korea. World War III will happen. It's a foregone conclusion. Of course, it will happen.
You think, Graeme, that would be enough? Israel, Iran, and the rest of the world would get involved because of that.
I think the truth is coming before World War III. I think we're going to get truth before World War III. We're going to suddenly have.
What do you mean truth? What do you mean? You're talking about
just about the level of corruption that's involved on the geopolitical, financial level.
We are having that now, aren't we? We are getting. Chris, there has to be said. Come on. I know that there's a difference with the way we measure the media here, but you have to agree, surely, that there is a great deal of disclosure going on into how government actually runs that our parents were never afforded.
Let me answer. First of all, I'm having some mild apoplectic fits about what Piers just said about Comey. I happen to know my oldest editor, the oldest colleague that I have, that is the person that I've known longest in my 25 plus years in journalism, is a good friend of the FBI director. And there is something that you've completely missed as well, is that the FBI director has a proven, concrete, staunch record as a non-partisan director of the FBI, and particularly
Clinton disagreed for a while, but
as a federal prosecutor. And what everybody misses about what happened with the Clinton leak just on the cusp of the election is that the director of the FBI, in fairness to him, was under heavy pressure from the GOP, from the Republican Party, to do a hatchet job on Clinton. But he didn't do that. What he did was put forth the scant evidence that he had as evidence that he was nonpartisan, that he wasn't going to play ball for either the Democrats or the Republicans. And that's exactly what you want in an FBI director. And now watch him when he has already announced very clearly that Trump and his cabal and his campaign have long been under investigation for their linkages to the Kremlin. He's going to not spare Trump either. So that's why I used the phrase character assassination when you were just speaking about Comey. And Piers, you're a highly intelligent guy too, and I remember meeting you a very long time ago, but I don't think you qualify as an expert on the FBI. Now,
no, I don't. I freely admit it. I mean,
as neither Graeme is an expert on strategic analysis or warfare or Islam.
To be fair, Chris, this is why it's so fascinating having somebody such as yourself on this show, and that's why it's made. That's why it's made for 2 hours of very interesting discourse, because we are people not coming from your background or experience, but we consider ourselves well read and well informed. We have made our own conclusions, which we will give you a hard time over, but it's also extremely interesting to have a guy who's been in the front line, who's seen it all firsthand, who can express himself as articulately as you can, which is, I've just been sat here listening. It's very interesting. And regardless of whether or not we all draw a line in the sand and say, we all agree, which I don't think we'll do, but
I don't think we're going to agree. No,
I don't think we will. But ultimately, what a fascinating 2 hours of conversation. Because I mean,
that's right.
I feel like
and we love each other too.
I've learned something tonight, and this is what interesting banter and discourse is all about. It's about exposing the reality of the situation, and regardless of what your stance is, we can push our stances forward.
Piers, I love you, don't you? You know I love you. Look, shut up.
I love you too.
Because I want to ask Graeme. Well, look, we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to ask Graeme about Scotland, because last week in the States, you may not know, I don't know, but last week was a huge week in the UK and in Europe, because in the EU and in Europe, because we had the Brexit bill go through, which basically means that the thing that needs to be done, this Article 50 or whatever that needs to be enacted, can be basically a letter can be put out by the PM saying, ciao, it's been lovely, EU, thanks. Yeah. And so we can do that now. But Scotland's kind of a bit annoyed about it, or some of them are and some of them aren't. And the ruling, if you like, party of Scotland, the SNP, is up in arms about it. But okay, Graeme, Nicola Sturgeon, she is an opportunist schmuck. I'm sorry, irrespective of your politics, the fact is that she is not putting Scotland first.
She's certainly not. She's an absolute disaster, and she does not speak for the people of Scotland. She's decided to push ahead with a second referendum to trying to get Scotland to rejoin the European Union after the UK leaves the European Union.
But she won't be able to do that because Spain
yes, I know,
will veto.
But the whole concept, though, is absolutely ludicrous. It's like the slave mentality.
Spain will veto
because
they're frightened that a bit will break off Spain and go independent, and so they basically,
Oh man. The whole concept of divorcing herself from Westminster only to get married to Brussels is ludicrous. She's actually split the party. Yeah. We don't need Brussels. We don't need Westminster, and we don't need Brussels.
Yeah.
Olly? Olly?
Yes.
I wanted to just make one last statement since there's so little
Please
time.
do. Please do,
I'm
Chris.
not going to, when a Scotsman is speaking about Scotland, I'm not going to, I'll let the Scotsman speak about Scotland. So I'm very proud of the more than a wee dram of Gordon blood I have in me.
Damn right.
Rather looking forward to a Highland wedding I'm going to go to in July. But here's the thing I wanted to say.
I got married in
and
Scotland.
it was about, and particularly in this rampant age of extremism and Islamophobia, renewed anti-Semitism, and racial and cultural hatred, not least as well in its other variety of misogyny and homophobia. Graeme, quite some time ago, who I don't think has ever set foot in the Middle East, if I'm not mistaken, said that that radical Islam is a spiritual crisis, that it's a problem of spirituality. And I want to debunk that utterly. First of all, Salafism...
This has got nothing to do with Nicola Sturgeon, has it? Sorry.
It's a point that's important to make, though, in a lot of the ground that we have covered this evening. I'm going to make it succinctly if you let me. Salafism, Wahhabism, is the most conservative, reactionary current in all of Islam. But it is the minority current. We're talking about 1.7 billion people around the world that a lot of far-right politicians, including not least Donald Trump, want to characterize as a monolith, when in terms of ideology, spirituality, culture, ethnicity, every possible difference that you could think of, from geography to the food to the music, are as every bit as diverse a population, global population, as in Christianity. And we must not forget, as terrible as the events in London were, as terrible as 9/11 were, since we focused on those two particular terror attacks, and we also gave mention to the awful attacks in Nice, that the largest share of the butcher's bill paid in confronting radical Salafism and Wahhabism is borne by other Muslims who are on the front line as policemen, as intelligence officers, as soldiers, and that most of the victims of radical...
You were going to be succinct, Chris, for God's sake.
Are Muslims.
Succinct, he said.
No, this
succinct.
is not a laughing matter. This is not a laughing matter.
Blimey. Yeah,
No, actually,
he
has a point. He has a point.
This is a laughing matter. Yeah,
No, it's not.
this is a laughing. It's top of the show. Top of the show, mate.
Islam is not a monolith.
Islam's imploding in itself, obviously. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's not imploding. Wahhabism
But it wasn't dull. It wasn't dull. My guests aren't dull.
Well, Wahhabism is a result of social engineering.
Oh, that's Graeme Sutherland. He's lovely. Yeah, Chris Kline. Go, blimey! I tell you what, mate, you talk for Lithuania. We had old Piers tonight as well. That was lovely. Wasn't it? A bit of a treat.
Yeah, it was cool. It's cool.
God bless them. God bless London. And everywhere, you know. Anyway, that was Jingly-Jangly, Revolution Radio. Yeah, Olly Connelly here.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.